Servus and welcome to another episode of the Pro Hockey Pod, episode 38. This week, special guest on somebody that I've actually played for back when I was playing in the Del 2. He kept my career going, giving me a chance, and we ended up going to the finals that year. So I guess we both look good. Something that I've obviously looked up to. You know, he's been a player in this league over here in Germany, and now transitioned to coaching and now into sports management. Someone's kind of career I'd love to follow. And for someone who expected to be only in Europe for 1 year, and now we're going on year 27, I believe. I think I could share the same path down the road, but happy to have this guy on. Always been a good friend to me. Welcome to the podcast, sports manager of Ingolstadt, Tim Regan.
Hi, Andrew. Thanks for having me on.
Now, as always, we like to, take it back to the start, kind of where you grew up. And I believe you grew up in Dorchester, Massachusetts. So how was your childhood there, and kind of what first drew you to the sport of hockey?
Yeah, originally from Dorchester. I mean, the guys that, from Boston or know about Boston, 617 area code, uh, gritty, gritty, tough area of Boston, Dorchester, and hockey town for sure. It was a sports town in general. So you had, your street hockey, you had the basketball courts, you had the baseball fields. So you kept busy through sports. And I think the biggest draw was I have an older brother. He's 4 years older than me. So he played hockey. And it was always obviously looking up to your big brother saying, oh, I want to play too. So it started with public skating down Neponset, the Neponset rink, it was called Divine Rink. And cold as hell. It was freezing. And you'd public skate, learn how to skate and everything. And then obviously you'd grab in the stick. And back then you would have the frozen ponds to use. And then just the street hockey. So it was just a huge sport culture, but a hockey culture. And just everybody played hockey, probably, nothing different from Canada as well. That everybody was interested in hockey. So that's how I got started. Started at DYH, Dorchester Youth Hockey, and I think it just went from there.
I always ask too. I like to ask the American guys kind of what was the structure of the minor hockey back then, because there's obviously a big emphasis on like the high school hockey in USA. Like it's not as similar to Canada where it's more like, the AAA, AA, single A kind of route. So how was it for you, your minor hockey structure?
Well, I think what happened was when I was entering that youth hockey program, you had a house league, and then you had like, Mite A's, Mite B's, Mite C's. So you had different tiers because you did have a lot of kids in hockey that were involved or interested in hockey. And then around the time I was about a mite, so you would say what, 6 or 7, then all of a sudden it started those travel teams. They called them back in the day, they called them travel teams. And what we had around the Boston area, Boston and the suburbs, it was Metro hockey. So you had teams like a St. Moritz, South Shore Kings, and I was actually recruited, or through a power skating. It was like a power skating traveling show that went to towns, and they put on a power skating, and it was Paul Vincent. So it was Paul Vincent Dynamic Skating who had came to Dorchester Youth Hockey, and they had asked, me or my dad at the time, hey, would he be interested in playing Metro? And back then, my dad said, hey, listen, time, school, everything, it's either town hockey or it's travel hockey. So we actually picked the route to go to the travel team and played for St. Moritz for Paul Vincent. And I played there from age 6, 7 to about 13 till I went to high school. So playing in that Metro League, you had obviously it was a little bit of a higher level than maybe the town teams back in the day. And then you would get involved into, they didn't, I mean, they had like seventh and eighth grade hockey. It was more the prep schools, but for the most part, it was high school hockey. Like my brother went to Catholic Memorial. There was Boston College High School, BC High, Don Bosco Prep. They had St. John's. So there was like high school hockey was very respected, but you also had the prep privates like Thayer Academy, Nobles and Greeno. So you had different leagues for high school, but it was very, very Yeah, I think it was prestigious, like a Catholic Memorial, Boston College, because you were always competing for that state high school title. And that was my route. I did the Metro Hockey, St. Moritz, and then decided to go on to Catholic Memorial for my high school years.
And when you get to those high school years, I'm always curious to ask, especially, growing up in Canada, I think around like your time, the major focus was kind of that OHL route, so the major junior. So for someone like yourself, growing up in the Boston area, you have some elite D1 colleges, probably in and around the Boston area and the Massachusetts area, I should say. But had you ever thought of the other route? Were you getting any interest, when you're playing, the Catholic high school route?
I mean, like in the high school, I think that back then, you'd have to correct me if I'm wrong, but colleges couldn't contact you until a certain age or a certain grade. So the first contact would be like, I think I got my first college letter after my freshman year, because my freshman year in high school, I had made the varsity. So I was the first guy to make varsity since Teddy Donato in Catholic Memorial. And I actually played in the state championship as a freshman. And after my freshman season, I was contacted by a couple colleges through letters at the time. So that was the first contact. And then you would get some OHL letters or WHL letters. But for us, for the Boston guys, it was almost like, what is this? What does this mean? We had no kind of real idea what that route was or how the Canadian hockey structure was built. We just thought, okay, you go to high school, you might prep private a year after high school, and then it's college. You didn't have any of those USA hockey development programs where they had almost their own team and their own league. You had satellite camps, to showcase for those national teams. But for the most part, it was that high school, and then you go on and you go to college.
That's really fascinating to hear because, like, on the other side, as I said, like, we didn't hear anything about US college. Like, it's the major junior route. So, me in Ontario was OHL or nothing, and then, maybe CIS after, but it was never like, I only heard out about it because of a friend's dad going there. So, it's cool to hear that it's the exact like opposite, but in the States. So, and when you're growing up and you're starting to get these letters, you made varsity at a young age. Like, how many schools had reached out to you? Like, are you going on lots of visits? Evidently you end up choosing RPI there, but like, how many schools had contacted you before that?
Um, it was funny. It wasn't, say it was like 5 years ago. My parents were kind of cleaning out my stuff that I had left at the house. And there was actually a big box. They saved all my college letters. So it was from Division 1 all the way to Division 3 letters that they had saved. So it was almost just about every school that had contacted me or wrote me, and then based on obviously how the career in high school progressed, you would see then the letters would come just from Division 1. So the Division 3 stopped writing, and they would say, okay, maybe based on ranking systems or whatever, that they would say, okay, they identified these players as going Division 1 or Division 3 based on what they did back then. Because we were very high profiled with Catholic Memorial. That Catholic conference and that high school hockey was actually, they were producing draft picks, a lot of Division 1 candidates. So there was a lot of interest, and you could only take back then, I think it was like 5 official visits. So you had to identify and pick and be careful to narrow it down, because you only had 5 official visits back then to visit schools.
And what exactly would you say was kind of the deciding factor drawing you to, eventually attend RPI University?
I mean, there was a lot of pressure coming from Dorchester to be Boston bound. I got recruited. I had scholarship offers from Northeastern, Boston College. And it was basically like, you have to go Beanpot if you're a Boston guy. And I think for us in my family, my dad put education, a lot of emphasis on education. And he said, just don't pick a school for hockey, pick for education, because like I said, back then, it wasn't like when I look at youth hockey and they're like, okay, NHL, it's like, wait a minute, like, no, you get your foot in the door to get an education if you're lucky enough. There wasn't any plan that you're going to get a full scholarship and go to college based on hockey in school. It was more if you're lucky enough and if you work hard enough, then you could maybe get that scholarship to go to college. So that was kind of the mentality in my family. So that played a role in just don't go to a school because it's a beanpot school. Go to the best fit. And for me, RPI was it was the only Division 1 sport on campus. So you could tell they were very, very passionate about hockey at RPI. Plus, it's an amazing school. It's a top university in the US. So for me, it was the mix of the only show in town hockey where it was unbelievable, a fantastic atmosphere to play. They were competitive, and obviously the quality of the school.
Yeah, those are definitely important factors. As you mentioned, a lot of people just kind of pick it based on the hockey opportunity, and where really they should be thinking about, the school part, because, the statistics of guys going on and having long careers after, it's not as high as a lot of people think. And end up having to use that degree, a lot of guys, earlier than they probably expect. But another question I had for you was just, you obviously aren't the tallest guy. And back then too, like the hockey kind of stigma was, they wanted bigger guys who could play that physical game. And, I know you're a feisty guy when you want to be, but was there any like adversities you felt like kind of coming up through, whether it was high school or in college there, just kind of being a smaller guy?
Yeah, I mean, I think my biggest thing was, it was kind of cool back then if your name got mentioned as a possible draft pick or if you got drafted to the NHL. And, the scouts were pretty much, they would surpass anybody that was under 6 feet. You might be better than the guy, but because of your stature, you don't probably have a chance. You're not a Cliff Ronning who has, everything, his speed, lightning fast and everything. He was, a guy that was undersized, but had amazing attributes in other areas that had him, succeed, say, in the NHL. And at our time, they would just kind of ignore you because of your size, not because of your compete level or your skill level or your speed. So that was kind of that was frustrating, but at the same time, it was what do you have to do to get where you want to go? So if like in my house, my dad was pretty straightforward. He goes, I had older, sisters and brothers, and he goes, listen, you're the last kid. I don't have any money to pay for college. It's a blue collar family. Like, if you want to go to school, you either get a scholarship or you're working and you're going to school to pay for it. So it was one of those things. If you want to do it and you want to succeed and maybe get a scholarship, you have to do something that sets you apart. And for me, it was I'm small. I have to be stronger than the big guys, or I have to have a shot. I have to have some attribute that makes me better or makes me more attractive. So, I mean, shooting pucks, lifting weights at a young age, like being strong like that, like a 12-month constant active. Back then, we didn't have the mobility and fitness coaches and all that individual, training methods that the kids now have, these days. It was more, you know, on your own to self-motivate if you wanted to get to where you wanted to go. So I think that was what I did. I concentrated on what sets me apart. How can I compete with bigger guys, with stronger guys? And I think a lot of it was when I got to college and we had those testing, you know, benching 300 pounds, squatting, so many pounds. Like be one of the strongest guys because you weren't the biggest guys.
Do you think too, like you talked about kind of your upbringing there with your brothers and sisters, and you being you kind of what your dad said to you, like no more money, and like, do you think that blue collar kind of upbringing, evidently transpired to you having this like really good work ethic? Because you see, like in the opposite side, you see, kids come from families with wealth, but they don't have the work ethic because they think that I'll always find a way to get there because of, whether it's dad's money or, I'll be given the chance. So do you think that kind of like definitely laid the roots for you to go on to have the career you've had, especially?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was just the basic values, the family values, the work ethic values that my dad had. He had, working two jobs to support, a family of five, kids, from that basic work ethic. And then it goes into competing. You have to compete. So if you want to be the best, you have to compete. And I just think it was just that relentless environment that we grew up in Dorchester, that you're in the street hockey and you're playing against a different street. We'd call it the Helena Road Hurricanes against the Westclo Wildcats. The Hayes brothers, also grew up on Westclo. So we have a few all-stars from the Westclo Wildcats, and you were always competing to win. It didn't matter if it was street hockey, if it was basketball, if it was league play. And I think the environment with Dorchester, coupled with, I think my family or my parents' values, it gave you that edge to say, doesn't matter what it takes. I'm going to focus. I have a goal. I want to reach that goal, and that's put everything into it that you can.
Oh, and you can definitely, as I mentioned, you can see why you had the playing career you had, and now you've transitioned to the management side, as I said, and doing well there. But back to your college days, we're gonna go down memory lane here. So how was the 4 years there at RPI University? Obviously, the 1 year there, I believe you guys were ECAC champs. But yeah, for those who've never been to college before listening, what's it like to go to college for 4 years as a hockey player?
Well, first of all, it was at 18 years old, you never really left home. Um, Irish Catholic upbringing, you had a curfew and be good and, structured and disciplined and everything. And then you go to college and you're away from college. You're about 4 hours away from Boston, say. And it's like, whoa, no one's home. No one, I don't have to be home at a certain time. And just to be that self-disciplined on your own without your parents or your family. I think that was the first culture shock. And then our team was about, I'd say it was 50-50, like American Canadians. So you get to know these Canadians who, you thought, growing up, it was like foreign, as a Boston Bruin fan, the Montreal Canadiens were like aliens. It was like that was the big rivalry, Boston against Montreal. And you thought these Canadians were like foreigners, but you get to know them and you're just like, geez, like really cool people. Funny story is that the Bare Naked Ladies, the Tragically Hip, that was my first introduction in college to these bands. And you were secretly trying to bust on the Canadians, go, this is terrible music. And then secretly you went out and bought the CD because you loved them so much, and I still listen, to the Hip. And um, just that, I think the cultural environment, the cultural um, nuances that you saw in college based on, the Canadians, the Americans going away from home. And then I think it was just the structure that you were in a team and it was very close knit. You were there every day, practice. You would party together. You'd go to class together. It really, I think, solidified a tight knit relationship, and we had success. There was a lot of competing at college because we did have a talented team or a talented group. We made the NCAAs. We won the ECACs in 1995, which was huge because they hadn't won a title since 1985. So it was a very, very successful, and it was a very, very fun 4 years at RPI. I have to say, I can only look back with great memories on that college career. And you made some great friends for life as well.
I've now had two guys on who went to RPI, and they both share the same, fondness of their years there. And, just as you said, the camaraderie that you kind of band of brothers, almost, you would say, and these guys that you stay in touch with to this day. And, like the other guy that was on, they also had competitive teams. I think he was part of some of those teams that won. So, it's honestly a good school. It was probably the first school I knew about growing up. when you thought of NCAA hockey, that was probably one of the first ones I thought of just from seeing memorabilia in this guy's basement. But um, you mentioned school before too, how important it was. You know, your dad always was hard on that. What did you end up graduating with when you end up finishing at RPI?
So I was in the Lally School of Management. I graduated with a Bachelor of Science, Business Management. Um, yeah, in 4 years. It was nice to have in the pocket with the thought process of, okay, are you going to go back and get your master's? And you're like, maybe some work experience first, and then I'm going to go back and get my master's. That was the plan in the beginning.
Yeah, well, didn't stick to the script on that one. But the next question I have, which I think is cool to hear, is, you know, you obviously had yourself individually, you had successful years, you know, on the ice at RPI for your 4 years there. And I'm curious, so you're graduating, as you said, you got your bachelor's of science business degree. Was there ever any thought of trying pro hockey in North America, or had you just kind of set on, you know, I want to go try one year in Europe to see what it's like?
Actually, just like you said, I was approached to go to an AHL camp, like a tryout, say PTO AHL, with probably my thought was you'll probably get sent down to the East Coast Hockey League. And then I want to say one of my last 2 or 3 games, college games, I think it was in Vermont, an agent who deals a lot with Europe had actually approached my whole line at college, and said, "Hey, have you guys thought about playing in Europe?" And we're like, "No, not really. Either maybe an AHL tryout or whatever, and maybe the coast for a little bit." And he kind of told us a little bit about Europe. So I think he gave us some insight on Europe, what's available or what's possible. And then I think we just got a little bit more interested in that Europe route. And then we said, okay, let's look into this. And then it just went from there. So that North American idea was not going to happen. So we just started to say, okay, let's look more into the Europe.
And you end up going to Closter C there, I believe, in the first year, so over to Germany.
Yeah.
We talked off camera about this. It was supposed to be a one and done, and you know, you're still there, so clearly that worked. But I wanted to ask you about the adjustment. So you're, as you said, just kind of what we talked about when you went to college. You know, you're a kid from Massachusetts, a Catholic guy, like lots of rules at home. Went to college. Now you're transitioning to Europe, where it's a brand new language, way different culture. And like, how was that transition for you? Because honestly, when you look at, you know, statistically, you know, you put up 84 points in your first year. I mean, it didn't look you didn't look very homesick, I would say. But, you know, how was the, you know, adjusting to the language, the lifestyle, you know, the Bavarianness, I would say, as well, of the old part of Germany?
Well, I think take the cultural. We'll start at the cultural side of it. I always related to you're parachuting into a foreign country. That's is you know the best way to describe it, because you didn't take German in school. I took Spanish, for instance, in high school. So the language was absolutely zero. You didn't have the internet at the time. You didn't have cell phones. So it was pretty much you had maybe a translation book that you bought at like a grocery store. And then you had some vocabulary words, and then you get there and you didn't have like the internet to look up like, okay, what are the traffic laws? How do you get to places? You don't have Google Maps. So, like I said, it was like parachuting into a foreign country, hitting the ground, and then saying, okay, what do we do? Where are we? And then with the hockey wise, I think what benefited maybe me was I think the ice surface was big or bigger than say college or back home. So it gave me a little bit more room, time, and space where I could maybe use, my shot maybe. I think my shot was kind of a strength of mine through the years. And then that developed into I started scoring goals. So they kind of said, oh, well, you can score goals. Before they probably didn't know that. They just said, we have 3 imports and you guys are supposed to carry the offense. But I considered myself as, I could do more than just check the third line. I might have some offensive capabilities. My shot's okay. And then I go to Europe and they put a tag on you and say, no, you scored goals. Now you're a goal scorer. So I think those adjustments, not only the cultural, but the hockey differences, but also I think the pressure, because all of a sudden, you had a team of, 20 people, 22, but the pressure was, okay, you guys are imports, you have to carry the load, and the rest of the guys are the supporting cast. So I thought that was a very, very huge difference where you had to adjust to pressure. You had to perform. And it wasn't just every 5 games, it was every night. And if you didn't perform every night, we had some talks that first season where, hey guys, you got to pick it up. And we're like, well, we had 2 goals last game, no, it's not enough. Like we got to start winning. And it was a big difference. So I'd say across the board, from cultural all the way to playing and pressure, it was a huge difference from a team game to, okay, the focus are on the imports.
Well, that first year, you end up putting, if this is correct, maybe they're missing a couple, but you put up 51 goals in 51 games. So I'd say you pulled your weight there in closer C, but maybe they expected a hat trick a game. So after that year, you end up going to Garmisch, and then the year after that, you end up going to Nauheim. And I'm gonna skip a bit ahead here because you had a very long playing career in Germany, but I think it's cool to talk about just the Garmisch days. So you, on many occasions, played in SC Researcy, as it's called, but the town itself is Garmisch. Believe you ended up meeting your wife there, if not somewhere around there. But talk about playing in Garmisch. Kind of that town. It's a very touristy town, I'd say, in the winter. Mountains everywhere. You can go skiing. Kind of one of those small towns, and also a great arena, kind of that old feel to it. Just talk about, your overall time in Garmisch.
Well, it started actually, from the Klostersee graphing days. So the manager from Garmisch, his English wasn't that good. So he had one of the imports approach me after one of the games that we had played in Garmisch. And, Dale Durkach was the import in Garmisch that approached me. And he said, gee, what are you doing next year? And I said, well, I'm probably done after this year. I'm going to go back and maybe get my master's or work. I just wanted to do this for 1 year. So he was kind of telling me like, oh, come up and visit Garmisch and take a look at Garmisch and maybe you'll change your mind. So I went up to Garmisch, looked around, and I had some interest from other clubs, from the DL all the way down to the first league there. It was called the first league back then, the Hack-Up-Shore-Liga. And I went up to Garmisch, checked it out. I said, wow, this place is really nice. It's in the Alps, the Bavarian Alps, right on the border of Austria. And it's kind of a fun rink too. It's like a nice rink. If you think back in the days, you could practice and you'd look out the windows, you'd see the mountains in the background and everything. So I kind of thought about it and I said, geez, this might be a good place to play. So I had, got into negotiations with them and everything, was fine. So I played that following year in Garmisch. And I think from the get-go, it was a little bit more of a transition because there was a little bit more, I think, help. There was more of a supporting cast on the team. It was a little bit better. And it took a while to get started, but once you got started in the way that you played, Garmisch really respected the workers, like the guys that worked really hard. It was kind of like a blue collar fan culture. And if you can kind of relate it to an original six in the NHL, it was an original six club in Germany. You get your Dusseldorfs, you got Garmisch, you got Tolz. And I think that original six, that tradition, plus the way the fans reacted to, the style and the way that we competed, they accepted me right away as it felt like family. My family obviously wasn't there, but just the connection that I had made with the fans was really nice, and it never left me through my playing career. That I always came back to Garmisch, and always felt at home in Garmisch. So I think that was kind of the start of if you want to call it, my love affair with Garmisch as a player. And then obviously when you meet your wife, it just intensifies the relationship with Garmisch, and I can't even. I'd probably make a mistake to say how many years I've been there, but I played, then I was coaching, and then manager at the end. So I put a lot of years in there, and still still have connections there, and still always like to go back and see how they're doing. And yeah, it was a good run.
I was gonna say I before this I kind of looked it up. I believe you played parts of 11 seasons there. So just in playing itself, that's a decade. So that you put in a lot of probably blood and sweat on that ice for that jersey. So it's clear, why you are such a respected person, especially in Garmisch. But I had another weird question for you. And we've talked about this before in the past, but I think it was funny. And like for the listeners, they have to remember that this was, you know, late 90s, early 2000s. So as you said, it was very common for teams to kind of come into the league, spend a lot of money, and then by November, they're having to bail because they run out of money or whatever. And this, like, to say like I'm laughing, but this was like kind of a common theme back then, and I think it happened to you on multiple occasions. But I believe once it happened in tolls, if I'm wrong. But can you just talk to the listeners about just kind of the mindset they had back then when it came to, building a team, how they spent their money, and then, getting these meetings, whether it's in November or December saying, hey guys, sorry, but we don't have any more money. And then the next year, this team would come back somehow.
Yeah, I think I mean I might have the wrong name for it, but like bankruptcy protection, say from the government or the authorities, you could apply for that back then. So these owners would come in, they would really want to give it a run, and then they'd see they don't have success and make maybe some bad decisions on players or whatever. And then all of a sudden they're running out of money, the fans aren't coming. And then they go into these bankruptcy talks, and they start saying, okay, well, what do we do now? Well, we might have to close down or play under bankruptcy protection. And they get to the end of the season, and it's almost like, okay, we're clean again, we can start. So I might be, saying it's not very detailed, but I'm trying to give you the gist of it. And I went from, I think it was, went bankrupt one season, went to the next team, changed teams that I thought was healthy. They went bankrupt in November, came back to the team that was clean again. They went bankrupt. And it was like 3 or 4, I'm going to say 3.5 seasons in a row where you were landing on teams that were, going bankrupt. And I think it was, the economy wasn't that good at the time. There was a lot of speculation. The leagues also didn't have maybe the thoroughness of checking the balances and the books of the teams. And it was more kind of like not so controlled as it is now, because you don't see a lot of teams doing that now, going into bankruptcy protection. So I had a run there where it was about 3 seasons in a row where it was just bankruptcy. And I'm just like, you know what? Maybe I should go back and get my master's now. Maybe it's the time.
Here's a sign. I believe it was like just like looking off the lead prospects, and you would know better than me. Like there was one year after your first stint there in Garmisch, you played, I believe, four seasons in 5 years with one stop in Nauheim between. Then you went to Tolls, and then I don't know if they went bankrupt at some point, but you ended up leaving to Innsbruck there, which is just over the border. Then the next year you were Garmisch for 17 games, Heilbronn for 15, and then you went to Denmark
Yeah.
and won it. I will say you won a championship in Denmark, I'm pretty sure. So
Yes. Yes.
um
It
that
was a
year
happy
ended as
ending.
a
It's a happy
champion.
ending. Yeah. Yeah. No, but you're absolutely right. And that's why, if you look at that phase, it's like, I remember one guy goes, gee, you're a suitcase. I'm like, listen, I go, I probably wouldn't have left these teams if we didn't, if we weren't forced to leave because of the bankruptcy. And that's how it was. I mean, that one year when I went from Garmisch, um, after 17 games, the people that were running the team at the time, they were coming in and they were trying to keep you to stay and give you that hope that the team would continue. and they would give you stories that Abramovich, he has a villa in Garmisch. He's going to come and sponsor the team. Then they had a sheik from Abu Dhabi living in Garmisch. He just needed a helicopter pad on top of the rink. He was going to take over the team. And it got to the point where it was they even called it back then. They call it instead of SC Recency, they called it SC Hollywood because of all these stories. And yeah, it's too bad because at that time, we had a great group of guys and we were still playing. We weren't getting paid, but we're still playing kind of thing. Waiting for the money, waiting for the monthly, checks and everything. And they weren't coming, but they were promising that, this Russian Abramovich guy, he's got money, we're all set. And then eventually got to the point where like, okay, we have to live here somehow. So I had gone then to Heilbronn. They had exactly the same problem that I walked into. And then I think I had 2 days in the transfer window. And my agent had said, listen, Denmark is this team in Denmark really wants to put on a playoff run. Would you be interested? I said, absolutely. I said, I haven't got paid in a few months, so I might as well. So that's how I ended up in Denmark. And then the happy ending was we unexpectedly won the championship against the favorite. So it did have a happy ending that year. And then after that, I ended up having then financial security in the sense that the teams that I went to then, I think they learned from their mistakes, especially the leagues, and I think they put in a lot of checks and balances and control systems that teams couldn't do that as much as they did in that that window, late 90s, early 2000.
Well, respect for you guys. A lot of you playing for the love of the game, literally, because there wasn't anything else coming. But continuing with your career there, you end up going to Wolfsburg there for a couple of years, you ended up winning the Del 2 championship and getting promoted to the DL. And I'm curious, was it always Wolfsburg's plan at that point to try to get promoted? And how did it feel for you? Obviously you had been playing in Germany a long time, and to finally, get to the first league, get that promotion, like that must have felt great for you.
Yeah, no, it was actually, I had met my wife in Garmisch. And as I met my wife, the the father from my wife is with 59 years old. He passed. So I was, in the middle of having interest because of the seasons I've had about the DL, about the first league. And I had said, geez, I don't really want to leave the area. So I always tried to stay around the area until, my wife and my mother-in-law, my future mother-in-law were, I think stable enough where I could say, okay, I could go off. And at that time, Wolfsburg was looking for that, that import or that German player because I had gotten my German pass at that time. And then I said, okay, what do you think? This is finally my chance to get into the DL. I had said no to offers before based on family. And my wife, my mother-in-law, all for it. They're like, even though it's a little bit further away, we said, let's go. So I had actually my first contract, it was with the DL in Wolfsburg. So it was a DL contract. Problem is they had moved up and they had 1 year to refurbish or build a new rink, and they didn't. So I got there in say July, and the DL had pulled the license away from Wolfsburg, and they put us into the second league. So they said, okay, what are we going to do? We all have, DL contracts. So from day one, Wolfsburg, Volkswagen, they said, okay, the goal is we got to get back into that DL as quick as possible. So they honored our contracts. Guys left, obviously. We had some DL players that said, listen, I'm leaving. And I decided to stay. I said, you know what? They gave me this chance. I'm going to help them move up. And the first year, obviously, it was a transition year. And then that second year, they go, okay, guys, this is it. We got to move up. There's no losing. So it was us and Castle. Castle had a great team back then, and we ended up winning. It was a tight series, but we ended up winning and then moving up to the DL. And then I got I got that chance finally towards the end of my career to actually play in the DL. So kind of was a rough road, but I ended up making it at that point.
Which is just for yourself must have felt, I don't want to say like relief, but just kind of like, finally after all these years of, as you said, like the work ethic you had, kind of lead by example as well. Like you wore a letter for a lot of your years in playing, and now you get finally get that chance in the DL, which, I always talk about this. Like everyone has a dream of the NHL, but someone like yourself that played so long in Germany, it must have been a dream as well to, hey, I'd love to play one day in the top league because, that's the NHL of Germany.
No, for sure. Like it was, I played in Innsbruck. I played in the Austrian league, and then I played in Denmark, which is the top league in those countries. And then obviously in Germany, I was like, gee, I'd love my chance in the top league as well in the DL. And I think it was a great motivation because once you're there, you want to show people, hey, I can succeed at this level. It doesn't matter. I've played in every level in Germany, um, but you still want to perform and you still want to compete at the best level you can. It's regardless what league it is. So it was a motivation for sure, and I was happy to be there, um, and I knew obviously the window was closing because of my age, and then I think I took advantage of it. My first year, and then the second year we ended up winning that Pokal that with all the three leagues are involved in and everything. So it was a very, very successful time for the team in Wolfsburg, but also individually for me. I thought it was a great experience in Wolfsburg, and the club was at the beginning of building of becoming what they are now. It's a very family oriented club, a very tight knit organization, and compete level in Wolfsburg has gone over the years. It's been I think they've been in the finals. I don't know how many times, but they're very organized and they have a great system at Wolfsburg.
And the one of the years I just looked quickly, it might have been more than that. You ended up playing with my boss, Jan Axel Oliveira, there in Wolfsburg. So, care to share any stories about him, or we talk about those off camera? Or?
Well, I mean, Jan Axel, I think, is a absolute ice hockey professional. He was doing squats before practice, after practice, worked hard every practice, worked hard every game, off ice, on ice. Obviously took care of himself. If it was dietary or just physically, and just a quiet but a great leader, mentor. I think for all hockey players, regardless if it was young guys or older guys, because if you're an older guy and you look at Jan Axel, like, gee, well, he can do it at that age, why can't I? So he was a big inspiration, not only for me as a player, but just for the team. Like he was just that silent leader that you're like, geez, you could. He would really lead the charge with his work ethic and his attitude towards hockey. So I got nothing but good things to say about Jan Axel.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, my short time knowing him over the past couple of years and now working with him, I don't have anything negative to say. Like he's just a very good person, and like you said, the things he maybe demands of his team now, that was stuff he was willing to do when he was a player. And there's a reason that he lives by those morals. So definitely learned a lot from him. After those years in Wolfsburg, sorry, you end up going back to Garmisch there. One of the years you end up helping them get back from the third league up to the DL2. But as I mentioned before, you played parts of 11 seasons for them. I calculated your points and all that. So for those listening, you played 1,027 games in Germany. That includes playoffs, that includes pokals, that includes seasons, and you had 972 points. And from a guy that was planning on just playing one year in Germany to put up points like that, like maybe you knew it, maybe you didn't. But to me, when I look at that, that is just like a tremendous stat. Your face, you're kind of caught off guard right now. I don't know,
I
but
didn't, I didn't, I didn't know that. To be honest with you, I don't think I had time to, I think, review that the professional career. I mean, I reviewed the college and the high school, because you have time. But I think because of how it happened so fast, you played. Then within a summer where I said, okay, I'm done playing, I had to decide if I was going to take over the head coaching job there. So I never reviewed. So by you saying that, it kind of it shocked me actually. I didn't realize it was that many games, to be honest with you, that my body held up that many games.
that's cool to look back on memory lane. But you just brought it up too, like, you eventually got to the point where, it was time to transition from the playing side and go to the coaching. And one thing I found like cool with you is you go right away into the head coaching job of a team you've given so many years to. Like, did you feel personally like you were ready for that transition, ready to take that responsibility? Because that is, most guys transition and they become like an assistant or something, right? To kind of get their feet wet. Where you had, as I mentioned before, you'd been a leader for years, whether it was captain, assistant captain. Like, did you feel ready to just jump right into that and, start the second chapter?
Absolutely not. I remember it was it was the season where our head coach had left, kind of in the middle towards the end of the season. Um, we got the replacement. Didn't end that well. It was okay, but it didn't end that well, the season. And I knew that a rebuild was coming again, probably a new coach, new players. We needed to change things to get a good season. And at the time I was 41, and I just said, I can't, and I don't want to rebuild again because it was good. It was going well. And I said, I think I'm done. I don't want to go half-ass at 41 years old into a new season. So I said, I'm done. I'm going to, hang up. And then they had said, okay, well, we want to keep you in the club. We want to keep you in the organization. And I said, well, geez, I haven't thought about it. I'd like to take a break, take a breather, and then figure out what I want to do. Do I want to stay in hockey? Do I want to go back and get my master's that I've been waiting to get, or um, what's my route? So what I did is I talked to them and I just said, okay, let me think about it. What do you guys have planned? And then they came and then they said, okay, we think that we want you to be the head coach. And I said, wait a minute. I go, that's not how you do it. I said, you gotta, if it's youth program, if it's assistant coach, you work yourself in, you gain experience. And they said, no, like we don't have any other candidates. So it's funny because we just mentioned Jan Axel. And at the time, Jan Axel was up in Modo. He was assistant coach up there. So I called him for his opinion. And he goes, you know what? Why don't you come up for a week, you know, hang out with us, see what we do, see what you think, and kind of look, and let's have some conversations and see if this is for you, like coaching is for you. So I went up there for a week. I was in on the meetings and how they built it. I remember being up in the skybox with Axel where he was on the bench. I was mic'd up with him. Just they were so nice to me to involve me as this, foreign person, and give me that insight into hockey. And the way they built it up, typical, inspired me right away. And I was like, oh yeah, like I know how I want to put a new structure in. And I was ready to go. And I just asked Axe, I said, what do you think? He goes, I think you should do it. He goes, with the discussions we've had, I think you should do it. So I think thank Axel for, motivating me and helping me with my decision. I came back and I said, okay, let's go. I want to do this, but I said, I want to do some things different. I want to implement some things. And they let me as much as the budget was concerned. And I started, and it was a big step, but it's like you said, I was very humble and very, very you know, humbled to the sense that I was like, wow, this is such an honor to have this chance to be a head coach and take nothing for granted, but put in the work, from morning till night. Put it will not, I will not fail for lack of work. I think that was my biggest motivation, taking that first head coaching job.
Well, you just brought it up, like the kind of back to your upbringing, as we talked about, like you wanted to be known for something in that hard work, and you were going to give everything you got, and you also were humble to be in that position, which I think some coaches might see themselves as, I deserve this, like, you know, I should be here, versus you that's like, you know what, like this is awesome and I'm going to enjoy every minute of it, but I'm also going to do my best.
Absolutely. And I think just off the other side, the humbleness to say I get to coach guys that I played with, or I get to coach guys that are young and hungry and want to learn, that you actually they might listen to what you have to offer. It's I think it's a great honor, and I don't think it doesn't matter if you're in the NHL or if you're coaching a youth team. I think it's quite an honor to be able to coach and to be in that position. Whether you're a head coach or an assistant coach, it doesn't matter for me.
And then after that, like you mentioned the rebuild there in Garmisch. This was actually when I was coming into the league. So I believe the first year I was in the league was 16, 17. So you guys were kind of a middle of the pack team. I believe that was your second year as head coach. And then the next year, you guys were a full-fledged force. So the rebuild wasn't much of a rebuild. You guys, and I would say we as well, because I ended up joining the team there at the end, but finished first that year and ended up going to the finals. And that was also kind of the beginning of your officially, maybe unofficially, I don't know, like sport manager side. Cause I believe that year you stepped back as head coach, went to assistant slash sport manager. And that's where Tony, became the head coach there. So
Yeah.
how was it? You've done on multiple occasions. You also did it in Ingolstadt later, but how was it juggling both sides of it? So like the assistant coaching part and also like the GM or assistant GM.
Yeah, I mean, it was, they had made a decision, the organization had made a decision about the management, that they were going to let go the current manager. And then they approached me and said, okay, we want you to be the head coach, the manager, do a little bit of sponsoring as well, in that sense. And I just went to the owner at the time, and I just said, if we're going to do this right and we're going to do this correctly, I can do the sport manager side 100% and support the new head coach, but I think we need a new head coach to come in. Uh, I think that's the right way of doing it, because my first year I was a head coach without any assistants. My second year, I had asked Red Bull, who was our cooperation partner, if Tony could come on and be an assistant coach, because that was kind of new, that a cooperation partner actually had a coach from their staff who was a developmental coach come on to the farm teams, bench, which is, probably normal back home. So I had said, if we're going to do it right, I want to bring in a new head coach, which was actually Tony Söderholm, who was, the assistant, made him the head coach. Then I could concentrate on all the back office stuff, putting the team together, and all the stuff that has to do with the sport manager role. And I knew that Tony was, destined to be a head coach. So with his motivation, his compete level, his organization skills, and his insight into hockey, I mean, he was fantastic as his first year as a head coach. I mean, he was already, light years ahead. So I could concentrate a lot on the sport management, teams management, players, and also I knew that it was probably going to be that my last year, because I would love to go into that DL level as some function, if it's management, if it's coaching. So that was kind of in the back of my mind. So that's how that kind of occurred.
Yeah, just to talk about Tony first, like I only was with him for 2 months, but I have to say, like, kind of touching on what you said, like I felt he was, definitely the Del 2 was a little low for him in terms of like his knowledge of hockey. And I always tell people this. I remember our pregame skates with him, and he's out there with that gold bucket on, just wheeling around, playing full ice boggo. Like he was still love the game, and he was able to be a player's coach, but at the same time be serious when you needed him to be. So, um, he's obviously in Red Bull Munich now, head coach there. But and you mentioned the transition, so that year we end up going to the finals. Unfortunately, we lose, and then kind of things fall apart a little bit in Garmisch, where they get down to the third league. But then you end up going to Ingolstadt, where you are now. First, as I mentioned, as assistant coach and assistant GM, and now you're the sport manager. So is it crazy to think like how it's come like full circle, like from you starting as a hockey player in the second league to now being a GM in the top league?
Yeah, no, I mean, like, I think it shows also that, when doors open and doors close, it's the path that it might not always be planned, whether it be in hockey or in business or a career, that sometimes you can't plan these things. They just follow the way that the choices that you've made, they happen and they open up just based on what you've done. Um, did I want to stay in Germany, from my first season on? Probably not, if I'm being honest. I mean, I always thought about, when are you going home? Because I have a big family at home. So I think it was, you know, it definitely wasn't planned, but I think it's even better because you take on the responsibility. You're a little bit loose. It's not, you're not so tense about, oh, I have to do this. This is my goal. This is what I want to reach. It's more, I take it as it comes. But when I get the opportunity, I just want to do the best I can. That's all I can do. And if I give my best, I hope it's enough. I hope that the people respect that. And I think that's how I've lived kind of my career here in Germany, that accept what I can give you, accept what I can. And those factors about sport, which is, success is not controllable. You can try everything, you can prepare yourself as much, but sometimes there's factors that you can't control. And I think that's why, I think my attitude is, I'm very, I think, relaxed in certain situations. I can take the emotion out because I know that, this wasn't a master plan. And I just think that I'm very, very honored to be in each situation, whether it be a player for 19 seasons, be a coach, or now in this management role. It's an absolute honor and a privilege that a lot of people don't get to get. And I think that that's where you have to, differentiate and say it's an absolute honor and a privilege, and you just take it as it comes.
A great way to do it. Obviously, as you said, you're more loose, and I think that makes the job not easier, but the stress doesn't get to you as you see as it gets other people, and just kind of like there's things that happen that are unpredictable. You got to adapt and move on. But you've been very generous with your time, so I'm gonna put these last three questions together here just to kind of get you out of here because you do have to run a hockey club. So it is a Monday. Um, I'm curious, like, what are your scouting philosophies? So, like, as a GM, like, what types of players like do you look for, and like how do you like to build your teams?
Well, I think it's based on, I think, the hockey that you want. What kind of hockey do you want? You have to ask those questions. I think if you need a fast, up tempo, if it's a skilled team, a hard team, I think you have to differentiate what team do you want specifically, and then get those players and fit them into those spots. And then take it into a little bit more deeper analysis and say, what do we need power play wise? If it's penalty kill wise, can these players fit all these roles? Do you need to have top tier, second tier? Um, if it's a goalie, what kind of style of a goalie do you need? Is he, is he a freestyler? Is he a block? How does that translate into the defense core? How does that, team defense? And also, I think, my opinion, I bring the coaches into the discussion and say, we go deep into the systems. What kind of systems do you want to play? Is this a defensive, system? Is it a neutral zone trapping system? Is it an aggressive forecheck? And I think at the end of the day, the way that hockey's really, really developing, it's skating and it's that skill level. It's getting better, better, faster, faster. So I think that's what I tend to. I tend to go after those if it's skilled and if it's a lot of skating ability. And obviously the IQ, you have to have a high IQ nowadays where guys can adapt, they can read situations, they can also fit into systems and have that ice hockey intelligence. So I think those are just the basic points, how I look at hockey and building a team. Like I said, that's just my opinion. I could be wrong. I could be far off. But those are things I believe in just based on my experience and what I've seen, how teams have been built either around me or with me. So
I mean, you guys went to the finals last year, so it seems to be working there in Ingolstadt. Another question I had, like I asked Axel this too when he came on, and it's good to ask someone like yourself that's been in pro hockey a long time. Like, how do you build up your network or any tips like that? Because guys like you and Axel, if something happens tomorrow, like you have to have connections, like whether it's with agents or players, that can come right away and can fit that void. So I'm curious, like, how did you build up your network over all those years?
yeah, I just think it was it didn't matter if it was like North American or whatever. It was just based on your personality, keeping contact with people. If it was Swedish, Finnish, North American, Canadian, whatever, you always kept connections with the players. And I think that brought you into when you went over to behind the bench life, you would meet guys, you would meet other coaches. And for me, it was always, hey, if you need anything, just ask me or, you know, write me or call me or whatever. And I think it was just that offering help to people because I believe with the old school hockey mentality that, hockey's a brotherhood and it's almost like a little bit of fraternity attitude that once you're in that fraternity, once you're in that brotherhood of hockey, I find that you always want to reach out that hand and help those people, regardless if it's an opponent or whatever. I always feel like you should be able to help. And I think that comes back to you. If you offer that help and you act like that, I think that there's a graciousness that it comes back. So always throwing out and saying, hey, listen, how could you help me on this situation? Do you know this player? Can I get a report on this guy? Very, very positive feedback since I've been behind the bench or behind the scenes working in hockey. I haven't had any bad experiences. And I think it's just what you present and how you act, it comes back.
I 100% agree with that. And just like talking to you and then obviously working with Axel, like it was so eye-opening to kind of see like people who are just like so honest and like you said gracious like that, because there is this like thought of in pro hockey or pro sports that you can't let people see what you might know or see your cards. So it's like, for example, if you were to somebody was to reach out to you about a player, you would be honest, hey, this is what I thought of him, this blah blah blah, where other people are like, yeah, no, do your own research, and then like that's it. Like they have this kind of like, guard up, I would say, towards sharing information because, then that guy could steal that player. But I think Axel said it to me, like, it's more like at the end of the day, you do your research, and at the end of the day, it's the player's decision. Like they have to choose where they want to go, and it's for various reasons, like whether it's they have a teammate they knew there, whether it's city, whether it's money, whether it's where the wife wants to go. Like it has nothing to do with a player report in a sense. So I think that's like the right way to do it, kind of that brotherhood, helping out anybody if they need anything. And, you yourself have been very gracious to me for that way. And especially with this podcast. So definitely how I see it as well. Last question here I'd like to end on for all our guests. What is one piece of advice, or if you have multiple pieces of advice you would give your younger self or the younger generation? So if you're talking to Tim Regan again at 15, 16, 17 years old, or the younger generation listening to this podcast who, are in their junior careers or they're still in their minor hockey careers, like what are one or multiple pieces of advice you would give them?
I think the biggest thing is I think the focus, like to maintain your focus in the sense that if you have that goal and you want to reach that goal. I think the focus is the most important because I think especially nowadays, there's so many distractions, I find. And I don't want to knock social media or whatever, but there's also these, the social media presents these opinions, and it's tenfold, it's 50-fold, it's 100-fold. And I think if the young kids focus on what they are and what they want to become, and I know it sounds like like, well, what do you mean? It's just focus on what you want to be, not what anybody else wants to be. Because I know it worked for me. The only thing I would give my former self is probably emotions, maybe control the emotions a little better. Because when you were younger and I had 140 minutes in penalties, that was absolutely not necessary. Just control your emotions better. But for other people, I would say that focus, just keep your focus, because there's so many distractions, there's so many outside voices. Shut that social media down. I know I learned when I was a coach that I kind of got off social media, because there's so many opinions out there, and they're not educated opinions, and it can really distract the kids nowadays. I think just focus on what you need to do and where you want to go, if that helps.
That is great advice, honestly. Especially with, as you mentioned, like today's world, like social media is everything. And, kind of like you, like I had experience when I was playing where I started focusing on the social media stuff and everyone's opinion, and it affected my play. And I think at the end of the day, control what you can control and just focus on what you're doing, putting in the hard work, and everything will take care of itself. So, that's great advice for all the listeners out there. Social media can be good, but at the same time, it can be a negative. So make sure you understand how to use it, and yeah, focus on just yourself. Don't see all these videos of guys doing all these skill stuff and think that means you have to do it. That has nothing to do with what real hockey is. And there's a lot of opinions out there, I'd say, from people who've never touched the sport or hiding behind a no display picture. So great advice, I would have to say. Thanks again for doing this. Obviously, as I said, you took time out of your busy schedule, and yeah, you shared a lot of good insight. It was fun to hear about your career. Germany has been basically, as we talked about off camera, it's basically your number one home now, since you've been there more years than in the States. But I appreciate you doing this, Tim. And yeah, we're going to see each other around the rinks, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Andrew. Thank you very much.
And for those listening, give us a follow, share the podcast, check us out on YouTube if you want to see the video form. And until next week, cheers and ciao.